We are starting into a new series tonight just simply called The Gospels. Everybody hold up 4 fingers. Here we go. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Or if you're like me, half Hispanic, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and Juan. All right? So we're going to take 4 weeks, and I'm going to kind of split it up because we have 2 weeks of regular service. Then in 2 weeks from tonight, or 2 weeks actually, 2 weeks from Tuesday night, the week of Thanksgiving, we're going to have our Charlie Brown Thanksgiving dinner right here, which is going to be amazing. So you'll want to be a part of that. So we got some great things coming up in this holiday season. The last Wednesday night of November, we're going to have a church-wide viewing of Courageous. Has anybody ever seen that movie, Courageous? So we're going to have a church-wide viewing of Courageous on a Wednesday night right here at 7 o'clock. So it'll be cool. We'll have lots of food, fun, and the movie is amazing. But tonight we're starting a new series called The Gospels. Since there's 4, we're going to take one every Wednesday night. So tonight we're going to start with Matthew. So if you're taking notes, or if you got a little notepad, I want to make sure that you get all this down. So this is going to be kind of a teaching time. Here's what God spoke to me. How many of you have ever, like, the minister or somebody said, turn to such and such, and you're like, I don't have a clue where that is. Yeah, me too. All right. So we're going to take some time. So I'm going to do a series called The Gospels that'll take us up to Christmas. Then after Christmas, I'm going to do a relationship series called 11 Reason. I think that's what I call it, 11 Reason. And then right after our 11 Reason series, I'm going to do a prayer series. So they're all planned out. They're ready to go. But let's start into Matthew. Now, if you're taking notes, Matthew was written by Matthew. All right. I'm not going to go very deep tonight. Matthew was one of the 12. Now, you want to keep up with this because not all 4 of the Gospels were written by one of the 12 disciples, but this was one of the big 12. Matthew was a former tax collector. If you're taking notes, former tax collector. He wrote the book of Matthew in 70 A.D. Well, if it gives you any reference, Jesus was crucified about 40 A.D., 35, 40 A.D., and so about 30 years later, Matthew wrote this account. Now, Matthew is one of the synoptic gospels. Now, hold up your 4 fingers. Now, take down 1. The synoptic gospels are the first 3, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John is not a synoptic. John is different from it, and I'll tell you in 4 weeks, or a little over 4 weeks. The 4th one, we'll talk about John. But the synoptic ones are Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Synoptic comes from a Greek word that starts out with the sin part, S-Y-N, meaning together, and then optic. How many of you have ever gone to get your eyes checked? What did you go to? Optometrist. So it comes from seeing together. So these 3 books, Matthew, Mark, Luke, are seen together. Now let me show you something really quickly. If you'll put up that graphic that I gave you, please, Miss Amelia, or Ryan, whoever's back there, you'll see that the Gospels run parallel to each other. Meaning, have you ever read one of them and you're like, wasn't that in another one of them? Or you read a story and you're like, isn't that someplace else too? And so the writers of the gospel sometimes, and definitely Matthew, Mark, and Luke, which were synoptic, a lot of the ones that were in one story are in the other. Have you ever wanted to know which is which? Here it is, right here. So we got some copies. So after the service tonight, if you want to pick one of these up, it shows you and it lists what it is. So take, for instance, like number 9, let me pick one that I can read. The annunciation to Joseph. So the story of Joseph is only found in Matthew, but let's see down here, number 15, the child Jesus brought to Egypt to Nazareth is in Matthew, but it's also, you can see that it's in Luke. So if you want one of these, we've got some. If we run out, I'll print some more, but it's really cool. It just goes the length of it. So you can kind of see what's in Matthew, what's in Mark, what's in Luke, and then what parallels in John. Let's get started into it. Now, if you're taking notes, Matthew is a teaching gospel. Mark's going to be crazy. Come back next week. Mark is just like hit the ground running, slap your mama, let's go. Matthew is a teaching gospel, meaning Jesus did some of his biggest teachings in Matthew. So list these if you're taking notes. The Sermon on the Mount is in chapter 5 through 7. The Sermon on the Mount. Everybody heard of the Sermon on the Mount? The Beatitudes. Next, the commissioning of the disciples to ministry is in chapter 10. So Jesus was one of his commissions to the 12 is recorded in Matthew 10. The parables of the kingdom. If anybody, I don't have time to go through the parables, but when Jesus said the kingdom of God is like something, that's a parable of the kingdom. It's like a treasure that's hidden in a field. That's in Matthew 13. Guidelines on how to live. This was a big one that Jesus brought. Oh, I brought my prop. I'm so proud of this. If you saw it on Pinterest, look what I have. Just for this series. Here he is. Sometimes I put him in the bathtub and have him walk on the water. Just kidding. Then we do I play the Ascension. Woo! The birth is not very pretty, but anyway, just kidding. Here's Jesus. The devil made me say that. All right, and he actually he'll tell you the Sermon on the Mount here. Where do I feel like a chiropractor. Yeah, so anyway, he's cool. I don't know how to turn him off. There you go, there we go. Isn't that cool, though? You're cool, Jesus. And also, this is for JGYA, but I brought me a Tickle Me Elmo. Yeah, here he goes. Which foot is it? Oh, you're cool. He's going to be in JGYA next time. All right, so he's still giggling. He'll kick in the bag. So the story of Jesus, anybody know who Jesus is? The story of Jesus is given in those four Gospels of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. So Jesus' teaching, when he was talking about the things that we listed, the main teaching part of his ministry is done in Matthew. Now, I'm just going to walk you a little bit through Matthew. If you're taking notes, hopefully you find this interesting, that the genealogy of Jesus begins in Matthew. It's also partly in Luke, but it's not in Mark and it's not in John, but it starts in Matthew. But here's the difference about the genealogy. Now, it's his family tree. So genealogy is a family word for a fancy word for Jesus' family tree. Now, if you go to the King James, it'll say so-and-so begat so-and-so. And they begat so-and-so. You know, what does begat mean? It just means that they were the children of, father of. What'd somebody say back there? Somebody know what begat means? It's the past tense of begat, or something like that. All right, so here's the cool thing about the genealogy that's in Matthew is that it is the only part in the record of his family tree that women are listed. Now, other than Mary, it lists, this is weird, it lists women that may not, have good reputations. But here's the cool part. People of not so good reputations were in the family tree of Jesus. Does anybody else have people that are not always in, your family reunion, crazy uncle over there? Yeah. So, but anyway, it lists, now here's one part, it lists Rahab in there. Now you got to know Rahab, anytime that she's referenced in the Word of God, bless her heart, she's listed as Rahab the prostitute. Now, she wasn't always a prostitute, but anytime that she's listed, even in Hebrews, after she was long been redeemed, it says Rahab the prostitute. Well, how would you like that? That forever your big mistake, whatever your mistake was. Martin the liar. Every time we heard about Martin the liar. So, I don't know why I just said that. Martin forgives me. So Rahab is in the lineage of Jesus, who was a former prostitute. Here's another one, Tamar. Tamar, who became pregnant with her father-in-law's daughter. If that's not weird enough for you, you thought your family tree was a family wreath. It kind of goes in a circle. All right, so Tamar is written there. One of the cool ones is Ruth. Ruth is listed in Matthew, only in Matthew, as one of the lineage of Jesus. But now here's a weird thing about Ruth is Ruth was not a Jew. Ruth was an Arab woman, but she is fit into, as a Gentile, into the lineage of Jesus. And Ruth is just an amazing story. Let me put one right here. This guy named Salmon in verse 5. Do you remember the story of when they went and they spied out Jericho because they were going to take it? And that's where they encountered Rahab the harlot, Rahab the prostitute. And she hid the spies. Does anybody remember that story right there where she hid the spies? Yeah. Salmon, Salmon, Salmon was the son of Rahab the harlot, later redeemed. All right, so it's kind of cool just how they all fit into the place. Now here's one of the big ones, other than Mary and Joseph, but King David is fit into the genealogy of Jesus right here. Now here's the cool part of King David is that it says, when it prophesies about Jesus, is that he will come from the house of David, or from the lineage of David. So he came from King David, shepherd boy, giant killer. You know who I'm talking about? Let me make sure I don't. Now this is really cool. This is really cool because right up there. Now here's the other part. If you're taking notes, it doesn't start with Adam. It starts with Abraham. So it goes Abraham in the genealogy all the way up to Joseph and Mary and to Jesus. So it doesn't start with Adam. It starts with Abraham. It goes, but right there toward the beginning, right when you get to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, it puts in there that in Jesus' lineage is Judah. Now you got to know Judah. Judah was one of the sons of Jacob, that was one of the sons of Israel, that was, Jacob, same thing, who exhibited praise. And so if you go to Revelation chapter 4, it talks about that when Jesus returns to the earth, when he comes back, he will come as the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Now, Judah's way back in his lineage, all the way up there next to Abraham, but it says when he cracks the eastern sky, he's going to come as the Lion of the tribe. Now, lion is because I'm spitting. Lion comes because that was its tribal animal. Judah was when they did their family seal or crest or shield or whatever, it was a lion on there. And so Jesus was the Lion of the tribe. He was the head honcho. Isn't that cool? I just like all this cool stuff. You're like, you're the only one. Okay, so one of the places where Jesus' birth is recorded was in Luke, but it was also in Matthew. It's not recorded in Mark, and it's not recorded in John. So his birth is recorded. Now you remember the 3 wise men. It's only recorded in Matthew. And there weren't 3. There might have been 3, but it just says the wise men, or the Magi, M-A-G-I, the Magi from the east. Now, most scholars believe that they came from where is modern-day Iraq or Iran, that these Middle Eastern Magi's or wise men, or they actually were kings. They came from the east. Now, here's the cool part. Do you remember when they went and they found Jesus, they said, we followed his star from afar. So it wasn't like they just popped in the car and 3 hours later they were at Jesus' house. Most theologians believe that Jesus was about 2 when the Magi showed up. And the reason being is this. Can I give you a little bit of history? During that year, which was 7 A.D., there were 3 times throughout that year that Saturn and Jupiter lined up in a constellation. I got to remember this constellation. Come back to me. Pisces constellation, that it lined up. And when the Saturn and Jupiter lined up, and it was recorded, not in the Bible, but in history, it was recorded that during 7 A.D., Jupiter and Saturn lined up 3 different times, and when they did, it caused a great light in the sky. So they believe, you think God can move planets? He made them. He made them so he can move them. They believe that during 7 A.D. that God caused those planets to line up 3 different times. One was like in what we would call May. One was like in September, and I can't remember the other 3rd month. But lined them up. And so they came. Now, here's the cool part. When they came to a guy named King Herod. King Herod was a wicked guy. He was so wicked that he had his brother killed because he didn't like him. He didn't want him taking the throne. He had 2 of his sons killed. That's one bad dude. And one of his wives killed. Recorded history, a guy named Josephus said that Herod died at the age of 70, and they said when he died one of the most horrific deaths that had ever been witnessed. It literally, why do I keep spitting? Literally, his body was just kind of eating itself, and I won't go into the graphic detail that historians talk about. But when the Magi came from the east, they went to Herod because they thought, we've come to find the king of the Jews. So they go to the king of that area saying, we've come to find the king of the Jews, who is the Christ. And Herod's like, he ain't here, but he's like, when you find him, let me know so I can go worship him. Well, we all know what was going to happen. If he had killed his brother, and if he had killed 2 of his children, and he killed his daughter, he certainly was going to kill some kid out there that was threatening to take over his throne. So when the Magi God spoke to him. When they realized what Herod was up to, they went another direction where he didn't know that they were leaving. So you remember the story that Herod had all the children that were 2 years old and younger killed on that one night because he was trying to kill Jesus. But God had already spoken to Joseph. It's recorded in Matthew, and said, take your family, take Mary, take Jesus, and Jesus was about 2 at the time, take him to Egypt, and so they escaped the plan of the enemy. Okay, let's keep going if you're taking notes. The next big thing that's in Matthew is John the Baptist. Anybody know who John the Baptist, remember John the Baptist? Write this, John the Baptist was Jesus' cousin. I can't remember if it was second or third or something like that, but it was a distant cousin. Now, when Jesus, this is cool. This is really, really cool, and I'm probably going to have to wind up here tonight. When Jesus was baptized in Matthew, let me read it to you. And when Jesus was baptized, he went up at once out of the water, and behold, the heavens were open, and he, John, saw the Spirit of God descending like a dove and alighting upon him. Watch 17. And behold, a voice came from heaven, this is my Son, my beloved, in whom I'm delighted. Can I tell you something really quickly? Because I know we have the little coloring sheets and the little stories and the little cartoons that we see Jesus come out of the water and little doves are coming and lighting on him. And then we hear this James Earl Jones voice, this is my beloved Son, in whom I'm well pleased. But can I really tell you what happened there? At this point in Jesus' life, in Matthew, he's about 30 years old. So he has gone from birth to 30, growing up in Mary and Joseph's house. Now, there's no record of him other than when he was 12 years old. There's no other record of what Jesus was doing. Here's the crazy part. Jesus didn't have some thing in his wallet that said, hey, I'm the Son of God. I got a certificate right here. I got a ticket. He had to figure out and live by faith that he was who Isaiah and the older prophets found out and who they called him to be. Here's the deal, is a lot of times when we read the Bible and we read the Gospels, we're thinking, well, yeah, Jesus did awesome things, and he knew awesome things because he knew spot on. He was God's Son. Every morning he'd wake up and there's a little red telephone over there. He'd go, hey, God, what's up? Down here on earth, what do you got me to do today? Do you realize that Jesus, from the age 0 to 30, had to learn who he was? That from 0 to 30, he had to listen to his mom and dad say, God has sent you to this planet. That he had to listen to them, to Mary and Joseph, and where they were telling him, look, Jesus, that when you were born, the angel of the Lord appeared to me and appeared to Joseph, and they told us who you were. Can you imagine you get to age and your mom and dad come and tell you you're the Son of God? You know, if it's like Ty D'Angelo, you're like, oh, there is no way. Son of Satan, maybe? No, I'm just kidding. Love Ty. But he had to walk by faith. He had to live by faith too. If you're the Son of God, you know, you got to carry yourself a little bit differently. You can't be tripping people in the school hallway. Hey, I'm the Son of God. Now let me end my message tonight with this right here. Here's Jesus, just like you, a guy, a human, learning that he's been sent here with a purpose and with a plan. And from 0 to 30, he just follows his heart. From 0 to 30, he just follows what God's saying to him in his heart. From 0 to 30, he's just reading the Word of God and finding out who he is. From 0 to 30, he's just listening to his mom and dad. From 0 to 30, from like maybe 18 to 30, he's building tables out of wood. He goes and he realizes something inside of him is saying, it's about time to start your ministry. It's about time to do your Father's work. He finds his cousin John, and he, argues with him a little bit. He says, you're going to baptize me. His cousin baptizes him, and all of a sudden when he comes out of the water, he hears the voice of his dad. Can you imagine what God was thinking? I know we think a lot that God just always knew what he was doing. But here was God in heaven, looking at you, looking at me, looking at creation. And at his right hand for all eternity, God has always been. Jesus has always been. And for all existence, for all times, forever and ever, stuff we can't even fathom, He's got Jesus sitting at his right hand, and he looks at him. He says, you know what? I want you to go redeem them. I want you. And Jesus was willing. And Jesus said, all right, Dad, let's make a plan. Let's do it. Let's redeem your children. And so Jesus steps out of eternity, and he steps into time. And for 30 years, he's separated from the presence of his dad. Can you imagine being away from your parents for 30 years? Mary and Joseph probably did a pretty good job, but they weren't his real parents. God was his father. So 30 years into it, he comes out of this water, and his Father God, who was sitting in heaven, who couldn't contain it anymore, he said, this. Can you imagine? It was probably being shouted. It probably shook people's gizzards. It was so loud. And this voice from heaven comes, this is my beloved Son. And he didn't end there. He said, in whom I am well pleased. You know that God is saying that over you tonight? That he may not be audibly saying it, but by the simple fact that he sent Jesus for you, that he's saying it to you in that love. Why was Matthew written, Jonathan? It was written for you. Matthew was written for you. If nobody else walked the planet but Matthew and you, God would have written Matthew so you would have it. Because he wanted to demonstrate the love he had for you through his Son. And he wanted to pour that love out on you through his Son.